Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
Welcome back to another edition of Hometown Heroes on Family Life. I'm Mark Webster, and this week's guest is Jeff Winton of Chautauqua County, New York, founder and chairman of Rural Minds, advocating for improved mental health resources for rural Americans.
Rural Minds was a result of a family tragedy that occurred in my own family a little over 10 years ago. My 28-year-old nephew, Brooks, the father of 3-year-old twins, died by suicide very unexpectedly without any warning. And it really planted the seed for what has become Rural Minds. Mental illness is a growing epidemic in rural America. The incidence of suicide amongst people that live in rural America is 65% higher amongst people that live in rural areas.
I think most folks would just assume that the big city and all of its pressures and frustrations would be the place where you'd most often see suicide as a problem, but not the case.
There are a lot of additional pressures that people that live in rural America have. For example, back during COVID, everyone was isolated, but people in rural areas felt the impact perhaps even more because the number of social outlets, whether it's church or the Grange or school activities, were already limited. So when all of a sudden this imposed isolation took place, people in rural America really felt the brunt of this. Another thing that happens in a rural area is that internet service is not nearly as dependable or even available. So during COVID, of course, many people relied on telemedicine. Well, telemedicine is all fine and good, but nearly 30% of homes in rural America don't have any broadband, and even if you do, it can be problematic. So even under the best of circumstances, broadband is an issue. The other thing that people in rural America deal with when it comes to mental illness, substance use disorder, or suicide ideation is the fact that the healthcare providers aren't nearly as prevalent as they are in suburban and urban areas. 65% of rural counties don't have a practicing psychiatrist. It's tough enough to find a primary care physician, and even if you do, many times they are not necessarily equipped or trained to deal with mental illness. So there's a multitude of issues that have caused this to become a growing epidemic. The agricultural economy has taken a nosedive over the past several years. So if the backbone of your economic health in a rural area is all of a sudden weakened because of conditions that we're facing in agriculture, you will definitely then also feel the impact to mental illness amongst the people that live in that area.
It seems in recent times there's been some efforts to destigmatize mental illness, depression, and so forth. Where are we at there? Are we making progress?
We are making progress, but not nearly as quickly as we need to be. This is one of the last stigmatized illnesses to be openly discussed in rural America. I think all too often, especially in a rural area, mental illness, regardless if it's depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, substance use disorder, is looked upon as a character flaw, something that you should be able to just get over. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and move on with your life. The reality is this is every much an illness as cardiovascular diseases, as diabetes, as is COVID, but it's not looked at in that regard. So one of the main things that Rural Minds has been focused on is getting people to share their stories, such as my family story, so that people can start to put a human face to someone living with the disease and realize that, gee, you know what? His depression is a disease, and we need to provide the same type of support to him than we would somebody living next to us who was suffering from prostate cancer or from diabetes. This will be an epidemic long after we've figured COVID out, and it's now starting to get the attention it deserves. I am very confident, based on the conversations I'm having, the people I'm meeting, the partnerships we're developing, that there is a concerted effort now starting to emerge across this country where we will start to be able to finally tackle this one last frontier when it comes to a stigmatized illness such as mental illness.
That's Jeff Winton of Chautauqua County, New York, founder and chairman of Rural Minds, advocating for improved mental health resources for rural Americans. Please join us again next week as we search for your home, your town, your hero. It's Hometown Heroes on Family Life.